think you have a technology, what should you do? And I wish somebody had laid this out for me 5 years ago, but after 5 years of making a lot of mistakes, this is how I would sum it up. Basically, you develop your technology, and through advice from your tech transfer office, et cetera, you decide if you have appropriate intellectual technology on which to move forward. So you're working closely with your tech transfer office. At that point, there's a fork in the road. Basically, the conventional route would be your tech transfer office would then look for a partner or somebody that the university would license the technology to. And you might have various degrees of involvement with that process. And there are pros and cons to each route here. If your university is licensing it, your tech transfer office, while it might be really good, they only have so many people there who have so much expertise. Do they really have the time to find the right partner and to really oversee that process? And then once it's licensed to a company, will that technology really be prioritized? As was mentioned, there is a due diligence process that they try to get the partner, has to meet milestones of prioritizing the technology. But unless there's really a passionate internal champion, your technology may just sit on a shelf or not be prioritized. And who knows, every Monday the priorities can change. And you may play a role or you may not. And for many people, that's the way to go. They don't want to have, many of my colleagues don't want to have anything to do with starting a company. They just figure they invented this thing, they'll publish their papers at the right time and see if the university can do something with it. If they can, great, but they're off to the next thing. The other option in the fork in the road is to start your own company. And why would you even consider doing that? Well, one is, obviously, you can prioritize the technology. You will be overseeing this as long as you can. There will be appropriate nurturing. You will be involved if that's something you like to do. You don't want to do this to make a lot of money. It's not the reason to do it. There's an infinitesimal chance that might turn out that way, but it can't be your main motivation. So the requirements are you have the inclination, you like doing this type of work. You're going to be putting some time into it. It'll be another one of your big projects, and that you have the availability of mentors, people that have done this type of thing before. I can't estimate the importance of mentors, whether it's on the financial or company starting side. And so this might be a little bit hard to read, but my dream come true would have been if somebody had put on one slide all the steps that I was about to go through, just to see it up front. So basically, at the beginning, you're thinking about what's your technology, is there appropriate intellectual property, is there a market for it, is it the right time, etc. You got your university commitment behind you. You're learning about the basics of intellectual property use versus composition of matter, the timing of the filing vis-a-vis your publications, and what filing a patent really means. It means almost nothing. It's completely different than having claims that are actually granted. And you learn about that, and it's actually pretty interesting. You identify the founders, might be yourself, one of your collaborators along with you. You'll quickly learn that being a, quote, founder generally means almost nothing, but people like to say I'm a founder. And then you're going to start working with an attorney. And this is really critical, because that's the person that will help you form the company on paper. I was told by many of my VC friends, Frank, you can't start a company, we'll help you do it. And where I live in Menlo Park, it's hard to find somebody who's not a VC. So there are plenty available. They said I could never do it. And basically, I just found an attorney, and the attorneys have different models. But basically, for no money up front, they'll do the work of starting your company, and there's generally some kind of agreement. They might get 1% equity in your company. There's a promise that if you ever get funded someday, then you'll start paying your bills, but up front you don't have to pay them. So you can kind of negotiate an arrangement that doesn't cost you actual money up front, cost you something. Anyway, the attorney can help you do all this. Typically, one would create a C corporation, incorporate it in Delaware. You'll learn about what capitalization tables are, how much equity does the founder have. Your university will typically want some percent. And so, but generally, you'll have most of the equity with little parts, university, attorney, et cetera. Then you'll create a business plan. And the best thing to do, of course, is just get examples of successful business plans in a similar technology. Look at a lot of them. The bottom line, like most endeavors in life, is that executive summary and the ability to describe to somebody in 20 or 30 seconds what your technology is, how it's unique, and where it will move forward to. If you can't describe it in 30 seconds, you will go nowhere. Your executive summary has to be able to do that. Then you have your plan together. Now it's time for funding. I'll spend a little more time on the different options for funding. Generally, you need to get some kind of funding up front, and then you get your university to license exclusively that technology, which the university will presumably own in perpetuity, exclusively to your company rather than somebody else. And most universities that I've been involved with, they're not just going to license that technology to an empty shell. They have to license it to an entity that can actually develop it, meaning, so I had to get funding for my company before my university would license the technology to my company. And in my case, the initial funding was from ADDF, which was a great way to get started. Then you've got a funded virtual company. And then what does a virtual company do? I'll go into a little more detail with that, working with CROs, et cetera. And then you think about your endpoints. Will you eventually have a pharmaceutical partner, license it to somebody? Somebody will buy the company. Rarely it might end up being an ongoing company. So when you have a virtual company, what exactly are you doing? Basically, you're taking this technology you came up with and you're baking the risk out as much as you can. It's all about risk reduction. So your number one job is to find more money, not any different than academics. Number two, you continue to develop your IP. If it's a small molecule, you're making more derivatives, you're building the IP fence around it. If you started off with use, you're coming up with ways to make composition of matter, which was our case. We started off with a series of use IP. Now we have composition of matter IP. You may have demonstrated efficacy academically, but now you have to demonstrate efficacy in additional models. You're thinking about what big pharma will want to see, and the more models that you have efficacy, the better. You're also thinking about independent verification to show that your technology works. Early on, you're thinking about biomarker validation. That'll make your technology a lot more valuable if big pharma can look at biomarker effects as early as possible. You're doing the basics of toxicology, non-GLP, just up front, if it's a small molecule, to see is there some viability here in terms of toxicology. So you'll learn how to kill a molecule early in terms of hERG, CYP, AIMS, et cetera. Most of us in academics aren't aware of that, but these are critical things. They don't cost that much, and your virtual company can get that done. And then finally, you get into the formal pre-IND work. So we've had our pre-IND FDA meeting, and things are looking favorable, and so we're almost done with our formal pre-IND work, and hopefully we'll be starting a phase 1 program pretty soon, and finally phase 1 and phase 2. And at some point, hopefully there, you're ready to be a partner with big pharma. So basically what you're trying to do is, I like this phrase I saw somewhere, effectively leveraging non-dilutive capital. And you'll quickly learn the difference between dilutive and non-dilutive capital when we talk a little bit more about the VC model. So what's your role? Well, you're a founder, which is, as I said, doesn't necessarily mean anything. And then you can be the chairman of your board of your company, or you can be a board member. You can be a member of the scientific advisory board. You can be a consultant. What you can't do, and I think most universities are like this. I know Stanford has this. We'll be interested to see what other universities have. I can't be an employee of any other entity other than my university. I'm a full-time university employee. So I'm not the CEO. I'm not the chief scientific officer. I'm not any formal position with this company. Somebody else, you'll have to get somebody else to do that, which is what I've done. And now the funding part. And I'm just about ready to wrap up. It's fun to go through the different menu options, and I wish someone had laid this out for me in the beginning. Just a formal menu, pros and cons of each one. The first one, self, family, or friends. I was actually wanted to put some of my own money into our technology, and my wife vetoed that. So that took care of that option. Friends and family. We've had many friends offer to put funding in, and we haven't accepted any of that. You can imagine the complications of when your technology fails. So we've managed to avoid that. Angels, they come in, every angel's different. Potentially, there's less equity that it would cost you to get that kind of funding. I had a number, again, where I live, not only is everyone a VC, everyone's an angel. So But they can tend to be high maintenance people. They're going to put in some funding, and then you're going to be getting emails and calls and texts every day. How are the mice doing? How's this doing? How's that doing? And doing research is stressful enough without somebody looking over your shoulder. Well, we've had a mouse die today, sorry. And so I've avoided that, but there may be the perfect angel out there. I haven't found one yet. So then there's venture philanthropy, thank God. That's the ADDF type model. I think Michael J. Fox does it, cystic fibrosis, Juvenile Diabetes Society. So it's much less equity than traditional VC, so you still own your company. It's scientifically peer-reviewed process. You get a stamp of approval. With ADDF reviewing, they get the best people in the field to look at ADDF technologies. You have guidance. It's a great model. I think it'd be everybody's #1 choice. Another one is, of course, SBIR. Again, non-dilutive funding. No, they're not taking equity when you get that form of government, typically NIH money in our case. And then there's the licensing and partnership, and that's your technology has to be mature enough, and in the case of drug development, that's tough to get a big pharma to partner, and there could be some upfront funding with that partnership. And then finally, venture capital, and I can share from my side, I really appreciated Jeff's comments. So there's a traditional VC, and then there's the more recent trend of corporate VC. So these are where companies that have all this extra money sitting around need something to do with it. It could be pharma, it could be a non-pharma, but then they kind of use the VC model, and they could bring some extra expertise along with that. But with the VC model, of course, with the return on investment, gives incredible time constraints that might not be compatible with the technology maturation or limited exit strategies. For the VC, every investment's extremely high risk. Therefore, they have to take massive amounts of equity. And so you will quickly become a minority person in your company. And then with each round of funding, you'll be diluted more. There are infinite dilution mechanisms. You'll have common shares. Your VC will have preferred shares. And so any event that happens, basically you lose. And so you will end up being less than 1% equity. And so my VC friends tell me, Frank, would you rather have 1% of a success or 80% of a failure? And I basically have gone with, I want 80% of the failure. So that's, anyway, I might change my mind. And then, of course, the term sheet. I had about 5 different VCs offer me term sheets. And I kind of went through the process just to learn about due diligence, term sheets. Fortunately, I have a lot of friends that are partners at VCs. They all recommend me, don't take that money if you can help. It's the worst money to take. It's the most expensive money. Don't do it if you don't have to. And the term sheet has infinite complicated terms in it that you really need friends to go through with you. They're all there to protect the VC for good reason. It's a high-risk investment, perfectly understandable. There's nothing in that term sheet that protects the founder or anything for the founder. And then the VCs will bring in their cadre of consultants. And it's amazing how this works. I had a friend of mine who's an orthopedic surgeon text me one day and had asked me to call him, and he had all these questions about Alzheimer's disease. I thought, wow, looks like one of his parents just got diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And I said, what do you need to know about Alzheimer's before? He said, I'm just consulting for one of the VCs. And I said, they have you consulting for Alzheimer's? He said, yeah, I do. I consult all the time. And so I noticed that when I did a little due diligence with VCs, they would bring in these consultants, and some of them were people I trained. And I saw no value in any of the consultants, at least that I met. Of course, there's some great people out there, but I thought a lot of it was a waste of time. So anyway, then if your technology gets mature enough, you're looking for your big pharma partner. This is really fun, complicated process. And you kind of develop a list of what big pharma is looking for, and each company's different. And of course, there are endless nuances of the list. Basically, your IP has to be intact, and you can have a whole day long on IP. You have to understand your target, as was mentioned. The big thing now is in vivo target engagement. Can you demonstrate you're engaging your target in vivo? Do you have a translatable biomarker that you can go from mouse to humans? What's your tox outlook? as many disease, what are your disease model endpoints, and independent verification. So my friends in pharma tell me 50% of what us as academics publish is not reproducible. Maybe that number's higher. So early on, as an academic person, you have to create a scenario where somebody else has reproduced it independently of you. Without doing that, you won't move that far. And then finally, licensing structure is fascinating. Again, you can spend a day on that. Upfront payment versus backloaded, how to design your milestones, et cetera. And so I'll just conclude for the future. I'm always thinking about when will I have my Kodak or Xerox moment and be not relevant to anything that's going on today. I think moving to the future, I think as the university incubator models get developed, I like the idea of those. Maybe university type people won't be founding their own biotech companies, I'm not sure. With new pharma and university models being really creative, maybe those will bypass people like me creating startups. The VC model will come back to being relevant and meaningful to drug development. We have some favorable trends. I think the NIH translational grants have just been an amazing thing that's allowed a lot of this technology to get started. The universities are getting smarter about creating translational platforms. We can take advantage of those. Translatable biomarkers means you can get to an endpoint more quickly, and ADMET's getting more doable. So I think it is a doable thing if you're interested. I'll stop there.
Chaudhry, and I work for the Michael J. Fox Foundation. So first of all, I'd like to just thank ADDF for inviting me to participate and speak today at this great meeting. Before diving into what foundations can do, let me just spend a moment about explaining what the Michael J. Fox Foundation does. I think many of you are familiar, but perhaps not all. The foundation was started about 12 years ago with one goal in mind, which is to aggressively fund research to find new treatments for Parkinson's disease. Since its founding in November of 2000, we've actually funded over $275 million in research. Last year alone, we funded around $55 million in research, and this year we're looking to fund about $60 million in research. It's made us actually the largest private funder of Parkinson's disease research in the world, and it's actually kind of opened the doors in terms of what we can do and the partners we're beginning to work with and that we've kind of cultivated over the past 12 years. So kind of expanding beyond MJFF and thinking about foundations in general, one of the things I think that is important to keep in mind, and I think this is attributable to almost all of the foundations that I've ever interacted with, including ADDF, Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, JDRF, the ones that have been mentioned here today and that one reads about, is that essentially, at the end of the day, we're all about de-risking research. So we heard a lot from Jeff today about risk and how certain groups have become increasingly risk averse, and where they choose to get involved in drug development is moving further and further down the development pipeline, looking more at sort of perhaps clinical proof of concept or post-clinical proof of concept, looking at phase 2 or phase 3. That's great, and it's important to have those assets at that stage. But what it means, practically speaking, is that in the preclinical realm and the early stage of clinical development, you're beginning to have a loss of actors who have capital there, who have money to be able to support things and push it along the development pipeline. That's where foundations come in. By and large, we're very patient-centric. We only have one goal in mind, and that's to improve patients' lives with new and improved therapies. It means we can assume greater risk. We don't have to worry about papers. We don't have to worry about profit. Those things are important for the actors involved, whether it be pharma, VCs, academia. It's a reason why those models work, and they have a role. But the liberty or the freedom that being patient-centric gives a foundation is that we can assume greater risk. And it means that our money can go in those stages where other actors have begun to pull out and focus on latter stages of drug development. So basically, if I had to summarize, what role does a foundation have in drug development? It's about supporting things along to the point that it can be handed off to an actor who may have more money than that foundation and who has the relevant expertise to bring it to market. $60 million in 2011 for the foundation, that sounds like a lot of money, but when you think about what a phase 3 trial costs, $60 million is really nothing. The amount of money it takes to even get from from preclinical to phase 3, $60 million is completely dwarfed by the amount of that money that it takes to get there. So we've got to always think about how do we get it to the stage where we can hand it off and partner with someone else who can help bring in funds and move things along. So now, if I kind of being practically speaking and thinking very specifically, how does a foundation get involved in drug development? What role do we play? I sort of see it in 4 buckets, and I'm going to caveat this by saying not all foundations are the same. Some will work in all 4 of these buckets, some will work in a constellation of these buckets, some may have buckets that I haven't mentioned. It's really driven at the end of the day by the amount of funding they have, by the state of the science, by who's in that realm. For Huntington's disease, it's very different than Parkinson's disease because of the market potential. We're lucky in Parkinson's disease because pharma is interested. I'm not sure you could say the same in Huntington's. Perhaps specialty pharma is interested or smaller biotechs, but not necessarily some of the large players. And that kind of drives how the Michael J. Fox Foundation thinks about our role. We think about our role vis-a-vis the other players. And so each foundation thinks about that, and they have different ways of dealing with the risk and the partners or lack of partners that may be involved in that particular drug development. But again, the 4 big kind of, general buckets, first is funding. And I think this is the one that everyone thinks about. It's the one everyone's the most interested about. And yes, we provide a lot of funding. As I said, we ourselves, $60 million in 2012. One important thing to consider, and again, this may not hold true for all foundations, but at least for MJFF, our funding is generally almost 99% non-dilutive. Again, what that means is that we don't put terms when we fund a project that would prohibit or cause problems if you're able to move that project or that asset further along the drug development pipeline and try to partner with someone. It means that we let intellectual property reside with the investigator. Part of the reason we do this is that it was a decision by Michael. He decided he didn't want to be a VC. He wanted us to just aggressively fund research and move things along. He didn't want us to spend 6-12 months negotiating terms. But that's our viewpoint, and other foundations may have to play a different role because there may not be that handoff partner down the road. They may need to get involved, whereas we have the luxury and the liberty of not being able. I'm going to do a quick little tangent here because whenever I talk about funding, everyone asks, well, how do I get funding? I've tried and it doesn't work. My one answer to you, at the end of the day, read the RFA and the RFP really, really well. Make sure you understand what the foundation is asking for. Don't read the title and assume that your project fits it. Read the entire thing. And structure your project to fit with what the foundation is asking. We have received applications where the investigator did not know about find, replace all, and did not switch AD to PD in all of the aspects of his application. Needless to say, that did not impress us. So, again, I make light of it. But foundations work really hard to raise the money that they're giving to you. They're often raising it from individuals or families who've been afflicted by that particular disease. So they're going to scrutinize and think really heavily about how to fund or where to place their money. And they want to make sure that the investigator is held accountable to the money they're giving. So read the RFA, and if it doesn't fit, there may be something coming down the pike that may. Call up the foundation, ask. Second thing, resources. So yes, we fund projects, drug development projects, but we also are increasingly getting into the realm of resources. What that means is, again, from the prism of the MJFF world, what that means is we're getting involved in animal models. We're getting involved in development of vectors, reagents, assays, antibodies, and we're putting them in central repositories where they're available for the community at large. If you think about this idea of risk and Parkinson's disease, we know at the end of the day, when a company is thinking, a large company is thinking whether they're going to invest in PD, they're weighing the knowns versus the unknowns. And part of the things that impacts PD is that we don't always have the greatest tools. There's a lot of confusion. There's not a lot of understanding about what tools ought to go where, have they been well characterized, how do I get access to them, etc. The foundation, or at least MJFF, and I know other foundations as well, have put resources and applied it towards understanding what tools could be helpful and accelerate drug development, and then making those available to the community and communicating that. The third bucket is about convening. Foundations, again, because we're focused solely on the patient, we have a very unique role. We're a neutral convener. I don't think many people think that we have sort of a, a negative kind of plan behind us. We're very open. We want new therapies for patients. So it means because we have that trust with different stakeholders, we're able to convene them and we're able to bring them around the table to talk about different research hurdles that are affecting drug development. That can take many different forms. It could be a meeting where you're having general sort of, brainstorming and thinking about problems such as clinical trial design. It could be about bringing players together in the pre-competitive sphere to develop tools that no one actor on its own could develop. For example, in PD, the pre-competitive project we're involved in that we've spearheaded is focused on markers of progression for Parkinson's disease. Why? Because very much as Jeff mentioned, if you're going in the regulatory pathway and you're a large pharma, you're a VC, and there's a compound and you're thinking, you're forward thinking and you're thinking, how am I going to test that in a phase 3 and determine if that disease-modifying compound is truly efficacious, you're very quickly going to realize there's no objective marker to do that. And then you're going to think to yourself, am I really going to invest $800 million? Probably not. Or you're going to wait for somebody else to figure it out and then do the trial. We don't want to either have that person step out of it or delay their activity in it. The last big bucket is really about facilitating collaboration. So again, I think that one of the things to keep in mind, and that Frank mentioned with ADDF having these great roster of experts at their disposal, is that foundations have spent a lot of time cultivating and getting to know the key experts in the field. When you work with a foundation, you don't just work with their staff, but they're willing to bring in the experts to help tackle unexpected problems that may appear, think about next step experiments, should things be successful, etc. But they're also there to think about, well, if this is successful and it does need to move forward, what can we do to help? Because again, our point isn't to give money and then sort of sit back and sort of say, wow, it worked, great, now what are you going to do? We have as much a vested interest as you do in making sure things move forward. So what that means, at least again, in terms of activities that we at MJFF do, is we think about how do we help facilitate collaboration. That may sort of take the form of something like a big event where we showcase, we have this every year, we showcase those things in our portfolio, those projects in our portfolio that are the most promising, that have been evaluated and where we think they're ripe for sort of handoff or partnerships. Or it could take the form of something we just launched last year called the Partnering Program, where researchers, our scientific staff, basically evaluate our portfolio, identify every quarter 10 to 12 projects that have performed really superbly, where the data is very compelling. We've gone out to VCs and pharma and we've sort of said, are you interested in receiving every quarter a pitch packet from projects in our portfolio that we've cherry-picked based on the science? And we will send it to you, and this way you get it. You know what is on the cutting edge of Parkinson's research. And in that way, they can make that next step introduction, we can help facilitate it, and we know that there's a constant interest. We keep people engaged on both sides of the sphere, and hopefully we help make those partnerships happen to keep moving things forward, because 60 million can go very quickly in 12 months. So I think with that, I'm going to end also to allow more time for Q&A. Thank you.
I want to thank the panel for a great panel, really terrific. Thank you very much. Open up to questions. I hope you wrote them down so you didn't forget them from the first beginning. Just to get things started, while you're thinking about your questions, Abram, I guess one of the things about tech transfer offices that drives it is sort of that often they're separate business units with budgets that have to be self-sustaining and perhaps even profitable. And so that makes the tech transfer office sometimes have to make difficult decisions about where to spend money, for example, on patents. And patent costs, for example, is a big cost I think in a tech transfer office, and you have to decide which ones to go forward with, and then worldwide rights and all that sort of stuff. And I'm wondering how how the tech transfer office views that in terms of risk, because if a tech transfer office is a separate business unit that has to show profitability so you guys can keep your job, don't you sort of sit in the same sort of place that Jeff sits in terms of looking at risk? I mean, would the patent office, rather fund a new antibiotic than a risky CNS disease modifier for Alzheimer's or Parkinson's?
Right. So, I mean, we're not absolutely a business unit. Again, going back to our fundamental purpose, it's to promote, it's more similar to the foundation in some ways in that we want to cure disease. And, but we do have a budget to manage, and we don't have an endless patent budget. So generally, I mean, we've been fortunate enough to have some successes that we have a reasonable budget, and generally we'll be pretty willing to take risks early on in filing the first patent application, in filing a year later the international patent. So the timing is you file a provisional application, a year later you file an international, what's called PCT, Patent Cooperation Treaty application that keeps the whole world's patent rights alive for another year and a half. And then 2.5 years after your first filing, you have to go into particular countries, and that's when it starts costing many tens of thousands of dollars. So that's usually the point at which we cut back. So if it's looking promising, even at the early stages of a university in treating a major disease like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, we'd certainly go all the way up to that point. And we would hope in the first 2.5 years to be able to partner it with industry or start a company and then transfer some of that risk or all of that patenting risk over to them. But at that point, that's where we do have to, living within a budget. And we can probably afford to take risks on maybe 2 or 3 things per year. Out of maybe 160 inventions, we file maybe 90 first patents. And then, but only 2 or 3 will we go to that internet, the national stage into foreign countries. So, yeah, we do have to deal with
So
reality.
the follow-on to that is, again, 160 scientists or 160 times scientists bring ideas to you. You can only fund 90 on the first round, 2 or 3 the second round. How do you make that decision? And also, because NYU has a very sophisticated tech transfer office that's probably way ahead of many other universities, as perhaps a member of the the Association of University Technology Managers, which is your trade association, could you also speak not only how you make that decision, but for all the other people that aren't at NYU that might not have as sophisticated tech transfer offices, how might it work there, where there isn't $100 million successes and big budgets and probably a lot more consideration of risk, let's say.
Right. So, I mean, getting from the 160 to the 90 isn't so much the budget as just evaluating it.
Is there a committee?
It's generally done within the just within our office, and we talk to experts in the field as necessary. And generally, we reach consensus with the inventor that that the 70 out of the 160 we don't do. It's because there was a piece of prior art that made it not patentable, or there just wasn't a market for it. When you really think it through. But if it's something for treating a major disease where there's definitely a need and there's initial positive results, we would almost always go ahead with the first stage unless it wasn't patentable because there were just prior art issues. So that's not really because of resources, but just making an evaluation. And as I said, we discuss it with the inventor, so it's not like they give us the invention under a door and we give them the answer under a door, but we talk with them and we might say, well, we've got these concerns, and they might answer those concerns. And we might say, we think this makes it obvious, and they might say, no, but I did this other thing that the other prior people didn't do. So it's generally a consensus, and we will release rights to the inventor if they want to go ahead with it and we don't. And that happens maybe once every 2 years, I'd say. So generally, it's a back and forth, and we achieve consensus. And then for going, again, where it really gets expensive, we hope to have tested it in the market. We've gone out to companies, we've gone to investors, we've tried to identify entrepreneurs, if appropriate. So we do have some feedback, and it's really the market answering if we're not close to getting anybody interested, that would be the reason. We would still continue to get the U.S. patent, but that would be the reason we wouldn't go for worldwide protection. Whereas if we're fairly close and there were questions we got back from industry that are answerable, and there is NIH funding or foundation funding that's advancing the technology so that those questions could potentially be answered in a year or two, those would be the reason we would take that extra risk.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, this is a question for Susan. So let's say your team identifies a new asset out there, and it's a compelling technology. It sits very squarely inside Merck's sweet spot for licensing. You take it back, you run it up the flagpole. What happens next? And why is that process so slow? And why is it so opaque?
Well, it all depends on the asset. So some of them move more quickly than others, I have to say. Some assets will be evaluated ex committee in a case where I found something in Alzheimer's that I know is a molecular approach that's likely to be of high interest to the senior scientific leaders at Merck. I can move that pretty quickly through the decision-making process without having to wait for the next licensing and review committee to meet. But for the other 35 that I might find, which are kind of in the medium priority, maybe a little more forward-looking than what I know they need today, those packages, those slide decks that you've provided me have to go through committee. Those committees meet once a month, and the committees are populated by senior scientific experts at Merck, as well as patent attorneys and commercial representatives who look at an opportunity and say, yes, this is actually a very good fit for our portfolio. We should bring this in-house and develop it here. Or they might say, it looks interesting, but I think we're just not ready yet to jump in. We need to see a little bit more in the way of validation data to support that particular target before we're ready to invest directly. Or they might just say, no, absolutely not. We're not going to invest in any more antibodies that target A-beta because we're already heavily invested there, and this is probably a good opportunity for somebody else, but not for Merck. So whether it moves slowly or quickly has a lot to do